Alright, good morning. I'm guessing that you guys just watched my last video. Let's move this a little bit. Alright, cool. I'm guessing that you guys just finished watching my last video if you're watching this one. If you didn't watch the last one, then you should go watch that one first. Because in the first video, what I covered was chromatic scale, just a list of all the notes, how you break those up to major scales, how you break the major scales up into chords. And today, what I want to do is I want to try to get through just more things with chords. So this is just a chords lesson, basics about chords. Before I get into it, a couple of things. Obviously do the YouTube stuff like liking and subscribing this video. Also, check out my music on Spotify. You can search William K. Hope you enjoy my music. So one big question is, what is the difference between major chords and minor chords? An obvious answer is that major chords sound happy and minor chords sound sad, but that is kind of a kindergarten answer, and I just don't think it's very satisfying if you're really trying to work with music. Here's the question that I ask actually, is out of these fingers, which finger is in the middle? And what you're probably thinking is this one. But that's wrong because it's actually this one. But actually the question doesn't make sense because it's these two. Okay, so I'm going to get back to that. Let's go to the board. Okay, so let's just make a list of notes. So we have C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and G. Okay, so what you probably remember from the last lesson is that a major chord is root, third, fifth, and a minor chord is root, flat, third, fifth. So the root and the fifth are common to both a major chord and a minor chord. For a C, that would be C and G. And then you look, we're filling in the middle note here. But 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. There are two possible middle notes. I'm going to say that again. Between C and G, the outside notes that are common to major and minor, also known as a power chord, there are two possible middle notes. If we pick the higher out of the two middle notes, that would be called C major. And if we pick the lower, that would be a C minor. Now, let's switch to a different color and count. If it's C major, we skip 3 notes, take a note, and then skip 2. So there's the intervals for it. And if we did C minor, we would do the exact opposite. We would skip 2 notes, take 1, and then skip 3 notes. So major and minor, it's really just a difference in what note is filling in the middle. And so think about that for a second. Just rewatch the video. If you have to rewatch the video, do what you need to do. This is really important. And this is what most of this lesson is going to be based on, are ideas that are like this. So, quick terminology, vocabulary. A jump this size from C to E, for example, could also be from D to F sharp, for example. Could also be, it's not on the board, but another jump that size would be G to B or A to C sharp. A jump in that many notes, skipping over 3. The name for that is a major third. It's named a major third because it's the main interval that we hear in a major chord. This distance, skipping over 2 notes, is called a minor third. Again, named because it's the size of a minor chord. That's worth repeating too. When you skip 3 notes, that's called a major third. When you skip 2 notes, that's called a minor third. Maybe rewatch the last video if you don't understand why it's called a third. It's just because out of the major scale, those 3 notes would be the first, third, and fifth out of the key. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to start talking about other types of chords. There's a handful of them, but before I really get into it, most of the other kinds of chords are not chords on the level that a major and a minor are. Major chords and minor chords are bread and butter chords that make up just like full songs. They have full sounds and they have functions that are just unique to them. Most of the types of chords we're going to be talking about are just kind of decorative versions of normal major chords or minor chords. There's some exceptions to that, but mostly what we're talking about is how to decorate major and minor chords. Okay, so basics. Let's go through some formula. Major, 1, 3, 5. That's review. Minor, 1, flat 3, 5. That's review. Now some new stuff. Major, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. Okay, so here's the deal. When you see a 7th chord, all that means is that you're doing a normal chord followed by the 7th note of that scale. Add it in. So C major, for example. Well, let me get into that in a minute. All right, get some more on here. Dominant 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Okay, so there are 3 types of 7th chords, as I showed on the board. 2 of them are major, identified by the 3rd. So this one is a type of major, which is kind of obvious from the name, major 7. But dominant is also a type of major 7th chord. The difference between them is the quality of the 7. Is the 7 normal or is the 7 flat? Before I get into the weeds with that, there's only one type of minor 7 chord. There theoretically could be other types, but the way that it turns out, there just naturally are not going to be. There's no situation where that would occur. And there's no situation that would occur, and that there is not a better name for the chord than minor 7. So, I said that weird, but okay, you're not going to have a minor major 7 chord. Is that a good way of saying it? Okay, let me just get into this. Okay, so we go into the basic whole half stuff like we were talking about before. We're going to use the key of C, and then we can go through and we're going to use the shortcut from the end of the last lesson to quickly write in little M's for minor. We know that there's probably not going to be a B chord that we need to know about. And I'm also erasing C because it's a repeat of C. So, we have 6 basic chords. Not immediately obvious the answer yet, but let's look at this, okay? So if we have a C major chord, that's C, E, G. C minor, C, E flat, G. C major, C, E, G, B. C dominant 7, C, E, G, B flat. Okay. In this key, there is a B. So the C chord that we could have would be C, E, G, B. C major 7. Cool. We're good. For an F chord, we could do F, A, C, and there's an E in this, so that would be F major 7. F, A, C, E. F dominant 7 would be F, A, C, E flat. The reason that in this key we play F major 7 and not F dominant 7 is because dominant 7 doesn't fit in this key because it has an E flat. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory there. Okay, the odd one out is G. A G major 7 chord would be G, B, D, F sharp. This key doesn't have F sharp in it, it has natural F. So G, B, D, F, that's a G dominant 7 chord. So maybe a short answer is we're just playing whatever 7th chord fits in the key. Unless you have a good reason not to, that's probably how you should do it. If you have a good reason not to do it this way, then we'll do that if you have a good reason. But if you don't have a good reason, well, there we go. Play the 7 chord that actually fits, that the scale actually supports the notes of. Another way of looking at this is by looking at the whole steps and half steps. So C, hold to D, hold to E, half to F, hold to G, hold to A, hold to B, half to C, and then I'm going to copy the end back onto the beginning. From C, half down to B. So far I've been talking about the 7 as just keep going up to add another note. But you can also think of it, because we're going almost a full circle, the 7th note is the same as whatever note is right below the starting note. So for example, you could think of that B as, well, you need to quickly remember what's 7 higher than C. You could just think, well, what's 1 lower than C? Same with F, you need to remember what's 7 higher than F. You could just think, what's 1 lower than F? It'll be the same answer. Same with G, instead of thinking what's 7 higher than G, you could think what is lower than G. That will be the 7th note. So G, it's an F, F, it's an E, C, it's a B, etc. So if we look at the pattern of wholes and half steps, and we go from the starting note of each of these chords, every single minor chord, like D, E, and A minor, has a whole step right here. So the 7th note for a minor chord is always a whole step lower than a root note of that chord. For D, the 7th is a C, whole step lower. For E minor, the 7th is a D, whole step lower. For A, the 7th note is a G, whole step lower. And it will happen to be this way no matter what key you're in. This isn't unique to key of C. It just happens to be that way because that's how the math works out. With major chords, it's not that simple. If we look at C, it's a half step to go down to B. From F, it's a half step to go down to E. But from G, it is a whole step to go down to F. So, summary, every single minor chord turns into a minor 7. With major chords, if it is the major chord starting on note 1 or 4 of the scale, the proper version of the major chord for it would be a major 7, a major 7 chord. It just doesn't work out that way for the major chord starting on the 5th note of the scale. That one would be a dominant 7 chord. So altogether we have major 7 chord, minor 7 chord, minor 7 chord, major 7 chord, dominant 7 chord, minor 7 chord. Okay, so some notes about 7 chords and observations that I make. The chord, which is major, which is built on the 5th note of the scale. In this case, key of C, the G chord. This is the only chord that, when turned into a 7th chord, becomes a dominant 7th chord. So, it is unique. The only time that this chord exists in normal, standard music theory and music is as the 5th note. So, for example, if we were in the key of G, you wouldn't ever have a reason to play a G dominant chord. Or, let me say that better. You might have a reason to play it because it's your song, you're the author, and you might have a good reason to do it. But it would never naturally occur. The only place that it naturally occurs is as the 5th chord in a key. As a result of the fact that it normally only occurs as the 5th chord in a key, if you play that chord, it's completely reasonable for the audience to hear the key 5 lower. So for example, if you play G dominant 7, you are automatically in the key of C. Just nothing else is required. If you play G7, it's the only chord you play. You're just standing there and you play a G7. You're in the key of C. Without ever playing a C, actually you haven't even played the note C. The G dominant 7 chord is G, B, D, and F. But you're in the key of C because that is the only key you could possibly be in. That's the only situation where G dominant 7 actually exists. C and F, the other 2 major chords that we have access to, it's not as cut and dry. C major 7 could occur as chord 1 of the key of C, but that chord could also exist as chord 4 in the key of G. It's possible in both. The F chord, that could exist as the 4th chord of key of C like it is here, but F could also exist as chord 1 of the key of F. So if I play a C major 7, I could be in G, I could be in C. If I play F major 7, I could be in F, I could be in C. If I play G dominant 7, I'm definitely in C, no questions asked. I definitely am in C. An argument against that might be that there are some songs, like songs by the Beatles, where they will use multiple seventh chords, sometimes in a row. And my rebuttal to that would be, they have a good reason. They're the Beatles, they're good at writing songs. I mean, a lot of people are good at writing songs and do tricks like this, but the Beatles are one of those people who are good at writing songs. They could be changing keys just instantaneously. Like 1 second they're in C, 1 second they're in key of F, 1 second they're in key of G. Actually, that probably would be my angle most of the time, is that I would say it is just a very short, temporary key change. If you're reading a song and the way that they write the chord name, if it says C7, that means C dominant 7. If they mean C major 7, they will write C major 7. But if it just says C7, that means dominant. Same way, if it says A7, that means A dominant 7. If it says G7, that means G dominant 7. If they mean the major 7 version of the chord, they will say it, for sure. But the dominant is the version that is usually more important to indicate because of its uniqueness, so that one usually will be indicated. Dominant chords are the type of 7th chord that is usually most important to include that it is dominant. So, for abbreviation purposes, if it says nothing, just the letter and 7, assume it's a dominant chord. If it's a major chord, that's more unusual. So they will note that in the music, that it is major 7 chord. But the abbreviated version, where it's just the letter and a 7, what that means is that it is dominant. Now some examples of other possible dominant keys. If we play the chord G7, what key are we in? The answer is C. Going forward, maybe just pause the video after I say the question and try to think about it, okay? All right. If the chord that you hear is E7, what key are we in? The answer is A. If the chord is C7, that's key of F. If it's D7, that's key of G. Okay, now a couple of major 7 ones. What if we have, I don't know, C major 7? Okay, so there's 2 answers for that. C major 7 could be key of G or key of C. If it was D major 7, that could be key of D or key of A. We just don't know yet. Until we hear a second chord, we just don't know. The author has to tell us what's actually happening next in those situations. So dominant is just different than major in that way. Okay. Moving on. Let's measure some intervals within these. Major chord, you remember from the beginning of this lesson, this right here is a major third. This one, let's call major third J3. And this one would be minor third. Major chord is a major chord, the intervals between the first and third and between the third and fifth note. The intervals are a major third, then a minor third. A minor chord is that reversed. So we have a minor third, then a major third. On to a major 7 chord, major third, minor third, just like normal. Then G to B, that would also be a major third. So this chord is reminiscent of a lot of things all at once. Right here we hear the major third, minor third from the C. Following it we hear the minor third, major third from an E minor. Minor third, we're going to have something very, very similar to that. We have a, let's see, I didn't write that, did I? C, E flat, G, B flat. So that is a minor third, then a major third, then a minor third. Minor, major, minor, major, minor, major. And then dominant, that would be major, minor, minor. So the major 7 chord, major, minor, major intervals, feels balanced. It alternates intervals between each note. Minor 7 chord also feels balanced. It alternates minor, major, minor. Dominant 7 does not have the same balance and symmetry. Major third, minor third again. That makes it very, very exciting. So we have two reasons why the dominant 7 chord is so exciting. The reasons they're exciting, one of them is because it's unique to the key, and the second one is because of the not symmetrical intervals. The major third followed by the minor third followed by a second consecutive minor third. All right, this is probably enough about 7th chords right now. Let's move on to sus chords next. Okay, so for you guys it's been about 1 second, but for me it's been a couple of hours, so I might be talking louder now. So the next thing that we're going to do is sus chords, and sus chords are something that's going to be easier to explain if I do a couple other things first. Add 9 chords are kind of like 7th chords, except that, well, you're adding 9. Another one could be an add 11. So what this means can be a little confusing at first, because you're thinking there are only 7 notes in the scale, how can we add 9? Well, you keep going. So for example, in the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. D is the 9th note away. So the implication when somebody says a 9th chord is they're saying to add the 2nd note, but an octave higher, so 9 away. The other one that's used this way is an add 11 chord, which is the 4th note in the scale, but an octave higher. So for example, C, E, G, D. Add 11. Okay, pretty straightforward. Okay, so those, unlike 7th chords, are purely decorative. The things they can do, for example, is like an ostinato. They can kind of create like a repeated droning note, something that continues for the whole song while chord changes move around it. So an example of this could be Wonderwall by Oasis. They have a high D and G playing the whole song. Actually, there's a capo, so it's not a D and G. But there's a D and G that play continuously the whole song, and the chords move around it. Having these 2 notes repeat constantly throughout the entire song adds a sense of emotion to it. All right, so that's a little bit of background. Sus chords are the same notes essentially, but there's some trickiness to it, because let's say that we're going to add note 2 or note 4. Well, we have the regular C scale. And then we have the 1, 3, 5 that we're taking normally. And if we try to add 2 or 4 in the middle here, like adding D, C, D, E, G, or if we try to add the 4, C, E, F, G, then these notes here are too close to the adjacent notes that there's no direction to the chord, in a bad way. Actually, it sounds cluttered and just a little bit gross in most contexts. So what you're going to do in a situation like this to make a sus2 chord is eliminate the 3rd from the chord. So a sus2 could be 1, 2, 5, and a sus4 chord could be all right. These chords have a very ambiguous sound to them because of the root being omitted, but it's actually bigger than that. And so here I have to get into like notes pointing. So earlier we talked about minor and major thirds, and those are very, very important for some things, but the most important interval is going to be the 5th. This is because the 5th is in essentially every single chord that we've talked about. In some of the 7th chords, there's 2 5ths, but I'm not getting into that right now. In the case of this one, there are also 2 5ths. There is the G down to C, and when you hear that interval of a 5th, what that does is it tells you, or tells the listener, that the C is the root note. When you have that sound of a 5th, same in this one, the sound of this combination tells you that C is the root and C is the main note of the chord. So the issue here is that for a sus2 chord, D also points at G. And in the case of this one, C also points at F. And without knowing anything else about the song, without having the songwriter tell us something else beyond that, we have no way. I'm going to say that phrase again. And without the songwriter giving us more information, we have no way of knowing which note is the actual root of the chord. So I'm going to kind of say this again. Hopefully, between me saying it twice, you'll understand it well. When we hear this combination of notes, C, D, and G, your ear will be drawn to C because of the presence of the G. However, your ear will be drawn to the G based on the presence of the D. And so you just have no way of knowing which one your ear should be drawn to unless there's just something in the music that the author has added that does clear it up. In the case of this one, it's the exact same situation. Your ear is drawn to C because of the presence of the G. Okay, that one's exactly the same as the last example. Your ear is drawn to the F because of the C. Let me write a couple of things up here. The notes for a G chord again, G, B, and D. So there's that perfect fifth, that fifth in context. And then with the F chord, so there's like a vanilla one. So for either of these two chords, man, I really wish I did know where the term suspended comes from, how to use it in a sentence the way it's meant. But the way I think about it is that there's just a suspension of information, or I don't know, I want to say suspension of disbelief, but that doesn't seem to make any sense. I don't know, but this one could resolve to C, very possible, every reason to think it would. It could also resolve to G. And again, you have every reason to believe that either of these could be correct. This one could go to F or could go to C. So a quick review of that section. Sus chords and add chords are essentially the same notes, but with an add, you'll use a number higher than the number of notes in an octave to denote playing that note being added in, usually the second or fourth scale degree, in the next octave so that it does not clutter the inner part of the chord, and you can keep the third. Because you keep the third of the chord is not ambiguous. You have a very easy time telling what is the root note. Your ear is drawn to a very certain point in an add chord. Whereas in a sus chord, in order to work the new note into the middle, we eliminate the third, and that creates an ambiguity because there will be multiple relationships that are accurate things to take away from the sound. Okay, so I started doing a segment about augmented and diminished chords, but after looking at it a little bit more, I really just don't think I want to talk about that and include it on this video. So I just want to say thank you for watching the video at this point. I will include this in a later one. Please do the liking and subscribing, YouTube video stuff. Leave a comment if there's anything that you think I forgot or that I could have done better. And please go to Spotify and follow my artist profile, which is spelled William K. Thank you much.